to SJ.
Hello everybody and welcome to Webinar 2 of our series from SQA. For those of you who attended Webinar 1, we were considering and highlighting some of the key changes that had taken place regarding the assessment of NQ units and higher courses during this session. We also built on some of the original messages from March 17 and the ministerial announcement which indicated about the removal of mandatory unit assessments. In terms of what we're covering today, we're building on this prior understanding to help you ensure that you can effectively deliver national qualifications in your colleges. And today we're going to be focusing on understanding assessment arrangements and how to apply these effectively, and also how to get the most out of partnership working within your centre. So I'm now going to hand over to Fiona, who will begin today's webinar. Thanks, Fiona.
As Sandra Jane said, we focused on changes to national qualifications. Today we will consider key dates for national qualifications to help you identify all aspects of teaching and assessment you will need to think about if delivering NQ courses or units. Explain the key aspects of any good practice partnership when delivering NQ courses or units. Identify what you need to do to ensure robust evidence for an assessment arrangement request, and will also emphasise the importance of applying your own centre processes for external assessment arrangement requests and also for any internal assessments that your candidates are undertaking. And throughout the webinar today, we will state where you can access SQA policy and practice for these topics. What I'd like to do now is give us our first poll of today. Okay, folks, that's great. That gives me an idea. I know sometimes you end up by or tri-level teaching. You can have different levels in your classroom, but that looks as if higher might be the focus, which is great because it's the first year of the higher changes. And really what I'm wanting to chat to you here about are key dates that you, if are delivering a national qualification course or units. Remember, in theory, you should not be doing both. And if you've got any more questions about that, you can ask me at the end of the webinar. Is to make sure that you understand the timelines you're working to. So I'm going to give you some of the key dates. I'm not going to give you them all, or we would be here to about 7 o'clock tonight. But the full list of key dates are contained within the NQ Coordinator Guide on SQA Connect. And if you're looking for that guide, you can get it from your SQA College Coordinator. But the dates in particular I wanted to chat to you about are relevant to you because your coordinator or your learning support person within the college is likely to need information from you or ask you to take particular action. And they will do so because they're being driven by our key dates. It will help you identify your timelines for delivery of a course or unit content to ensure your candidates are ready for their assessments. And bear in mind, remember in Webinar 1, we talked about course changes, unit approaches, grade D, recognising positive achievement, etc. So this augments that information. It puts it in a context for you. So let's get started then. The first date I've got up there is the 22nd of October. And this is when any assessment arrangement requests you might need for your candidates, the system opens. And what I mean by that is it's the electronic system by which you submit a request or requests for your candidate. At the same time, we'll also provide on our open website English as an additional language, and using ICT without spell check and or transcription without correction, and who do not have an additional assessment need, spreadsheets. So there'll be 2 spreadsheets there, folks, available for you. One where your candidate has English as an additional language, and one where your candidate might want to use ICT without spell check or transcription without correction. Now, those of you are reading, you'll see I've typed by mistake ESOL spreadsheet. That should be EAL. So don't go looking for ESOL, it's EAL. So my apologies about that. The next date that's really quite important if you're delivering units this year, NQ units only, and by that I mean the freestanding units at SCQF level 5 or the higher units, or even the units at National 4, is the 3rd of December, because that's when SQA will issue to the college coordinator selections for round 1 event verification. You might know that as central verification. It's basically where we want to come and uplift evidence from you. And we'll uplift that evidence on the 15th of January. Now you'll see there you don't have a lot of time with Christmas holidays and one thing and another going on. You need to know about that date if you've been selected as soon as possible to give you time to gather the evidence and send in to us. On the 25th of January, round 2 visiting verification selections are issued. So at that point, again, your college coordinator might want to come and see you to say, guess what, you've been selected again. And that can happen. You can be selected for event and visiting. It depends very much on the subject and the type of evidence that generates. And also if we think there's been concerns or issues around that subject delivery, not necessarily within your centre, but there might have been issues nationally that we want to help support centres with. And also on the 31st of January is the closing date for adapted and digital question paper requests, and we'll chat more about them later in the webinar. So quite a lot of key dates there, and really important that you're aware of them, and probably really important too, you're aware of them because your college coordinator will probably have their own date to give them a little day, 2 or 3 days, maybe even a week, to meet those deadlines for us. So again, that's SQA's published dates, but you might want to double check with your college coordinator the dates that your college are working to. And moving on then, so another key one on the 31st of January is the closing date for entry information on courses or units. So again, that's where we're looking for an indication from you as to whether your candidate is doing a course or units, and then we will plan accordingly around that. You'll then see that between the 1st to the 28th of February, it's the visiting verification period. So that's where you'll have been notified of visiting verification back in December, and that's the period that we would like to undertake that activity. The 11th of February onwards, that's visiting examining period commences. Now that's different to visiting verification, but depending on the subject, the National Qualification subject course that you're delivering, that could involve visiting examining. So it's important that you're aware that visiting examining can happen any time onward from the 11th of February. So it's important if there's things like hospitality or practical cake craft, etc., that you're aware of that and you're preparing and planning for assessment accordingly. And then from the 1st of March to the 24th of May, inclusive, we have the round 2 visiting verification period. And again, you would have been notified of that on the 25th of January. This one's really quite important. The 8th of March, closing date for alternative venue request forms. We're going to chat about partnership working later on in this webinar. And that's important if, for example, if any of your candidates may be sitting the external assessment elsewhere. In other words, they're not going to be sitting at your college, they're going somewhere else to undertake the external assessment. So that is the closing date for you telling us that the candidate's question paper needs to go to a different centre. On the 11th of March, we issue the round 2 event verification selections. So again, don't think if you were selected in round 1, that's you off the hook. Possibly not. You could be selected in round 2. And that applies for visiting as well. Now, the 15th of March is you might call that D-Day, I don't know, but that's where if you were selected, your verification results will be issued. And they'll go to the college coordinator first, and then they'll let you know the outcome of that. And we'll chat more about quality assurance in Webinar 3. Now, this next date of the 21st of March that I've highlighted to you, that's really important this year, folks, for the simple reason it's a little bit earlier than normal, and that is because of the changes to when Easter holidays fall in 2019. That's also had an impact on when the diet starts. So on the 21st of March, that's the main update lift for all externally assessed coursework, with the exception of those national 5 subjects that are listed there. Now, I don't know what subjects you're involved in, but if you're offering any of them, you have a later update. But if you're not offering those subjects, you need to have the coursework, whether that's the portfolio, the assignment, whatever that coursework is, ready for uplift. So if you think about that logically from a learning, teaching and assessment perspective, it doesn't give your candidates a lot of time starting now and working through. And then the 28th of March is the uplift for the higher subjects, with the exception of those subjects listed there on that slide. So again, same idea. Your National 5 candidates are the 21st of March, higher candidates are the 28th of March. Again, another key date there is the 31st of March, very important, because we know now more and more that budgets are tight. So again, that's the closing date for entry withdrawals and changes of level. So in other words, if you decide, for example, at that point, you don't want the candidate doing the higher, you want to put them down to National 5, or conversely, they're struggling with a course and you think, nope, the units are for them, that's your last chance to enter them without incurring a late fee. You can still enter for units and for courses after that, but you will incur a late entry charge, which you probably don't want to do. And also on the 31st of March, you'll receive your internal assessment mark forms, where appropriate, depending on the subject, and those relate to the coursework again. This is really quite important, 9th of April to the 14th of June. Exceptional circumstances aren't just always exam related. In other words, they don't just always happen on the day of an exam. They can happen any time from the 9th of April onwards. So you have that window, if you like, to submit those exceptional circumstance requests to us. Remember too, folks, you have a 10-day window. So if something does happen on the day of the exam to your candidate, your college coordinator only has 10 days from that date to submit a request to us. 18th of April, another very important one. That is the closing date for assessment arrangement requests. And remember, we talked about when those opened earlier in the webinar, and we talked about our English as an additional language, our EAL spreadsheet and an ICT spreadsheets there. So again, it's thinking about making sure you've got everything in place so that we send you what you need in terms of question papers, etc. And then again, a lot happening in April, 24th of April, uplift of verification materials for round 2 event. And again, thinking of when Easter may fall for you within your college, you may have to do that work much before the 24th of April if you're taking some time off. Also on the 24th of April is the uplift for externally assessed coursework for National 5 and higher subjects that were exempt in March. So remember that list I showed you a few slides back? So let's remind ourselves there for National 5, we will come and uplift coursework on the 24th of April for art and design, care, design and manufacture, hospitality, practical cake craft, music and PE. And again, with the holidays, your candidates may not be around, so you'll still be working to an earlier deadline there than perhaps you would have anticipated. And for higher, again, you were talking there about the subjects that were exempt in March as art and design, care, childcare and development, design and manufacture, fashion and textile technology, music and photography. And then also on the 24th of April, we will pick up the rest of the coursework for advanced higher subjects, again with some exceptions, which are art and design, both a design and expressive portfolio, the drama project, the English portfolio writing, the geography project and the music portfolio. So again, it's worth being aware of what subject and also what level of subject you're offering, because that will give you a real good indication of your teaching and assessment timelines. Nearly finished here with the key dates section. So again, the 26th of April is the first closing date for submission of your internal assessment mark forms and estimates. So check with your SQA coordinator for your subject, because you may have a slightly later date, but that's the first date where the first closing date that will work to for submission of internal assessment mark forms and estimates. Remember, estimates are absolutely critical if you're delivering a national qualification course. If you have no estimates submitted for the course, you will not be able to submit an exceptional circumstance for your candidate, and you would have difficulty submitting a post-result service request. So please don't forget about your estimates, estimating throughout the year of delivery and getting your estimates into us. And there we have 30th of May, the uplift for externally assessed coursework submissions for higher photography and advanced higher art and design. And then finally, again, 3rd of June, really important. And we know this can be a challenge for some of your candidates, because very often they will still need June and take June to complete unit assessments. However, this is when we're looking for all results. So we're looking for, has your candidate passed, or are you going to actually withdraw them or fail them there? So it's any outstanding unit results for advanced higher, because remember this year, folks, advanced higher still has units as mandatory content, but National 5 and higher do not. We'll be looking for your final submission for the English spoken language component, and any other outstanding unit results from National 2 to 4, and obviously the freestanding SCQF level 5 and higher units. So that's often where SQA, myself as one of the liaison managers, will be chasing or talking quite closely to your college coordinator, because we want to make sure that candidates are accurately certificated, which is the last date there on the 6th of August. Again, on the 5th of June, we'll issue any round 2 verification results. And then we have quite a narrow window up to the 21st of June is the final date for submission of all verification follow-up activities. So that's where you've had a not accepted and you've had to take some corrective action. We will take it beyond the 21st of June, but it's very risky for everyone involved. So we will work very hard with you in partnership to make sure that should a not accepted happen, we have everything cleared up by the 21st of June. In Webinar 3, I'll highlight relevant dates for post-results services in 2019. If you want to know more about key dates to help with your planning for teaching and assessment of your candidates, particularly if you have multiple subjects and multiple levels, I would strongly suggest now, if you haven't already done so, speak to your college coordinator. Speak to your data team, because they're the ones that are putting in the entries and results for you. The guide for SQA coordinators is on SQA Connect. You would have to get that through your SQA coordinator, but as I mentioned earlier in the webinar, they have probably produced their own calendar of key dates that they want you to work to. So please make sure you're aware of that. And if you're not, I would suggest you go and try and find out as soon as you can. What we're going to do now is another couple of polls for you, just to see if you've been listening. Well done, folks. That's it exactly. So that's why it's so important we work together to try and make sure that we get everything in and processed on time. Hey, well done again, folks. Fabulous. Yes, 25th of April. It's actually a day earlier than we would have liked, but we had no choice in that for Diet 19 because of the way Easter fell. So again, when you take that into consideration, take off the Easter holidays, you're really, really talking about the end of March, probably for most of your candidates. If they're doing courses, they have a bit longer if they are doing the freestanding units. What I'd like to do now is move on to the second topic within our webinar today, and that's talking about partnerships. What I want to chat to you about here is one particular type of model. There can be lots of different models in terms of partnerships, but what I wanted to discuss with you or highlight to you was the one where the partnership in question is between a college and a school, and it has school learners as candidates of the college. So in other words, the college is the presenting centre, and the college deals with all aspects of the national qualification courses or units. And I've got another poll for you here, folks, because I just want to get a feel if any of you are involved with partnerships. Ah, fabulous, great. So you are. And again, those key dates which we've just chatted about and I've ran through with you are just as important if you're offering a national qualification courses unit, particularly if you're doing it via a partnership arrangement, because that might squeeze you more in terms of those key dates. So let's have a look at what this model would entail. What I've put up here is all the functions that a college would do in this particular model. And what that means is this would be the college responsibilities that would occur therefore. So a college, first of all, must be approved to deliver the qualification. Colleges, unlike schools, do not get automatic approval. So it's always worth checking with your coordinator and your data people that the college is approved to deliver the national qualification course. As a college, you will probably set entry requirements and select pupils. You may also interview those pupils to see whether they can go on to do a particular course with you. That might involve you sending applications to the school asking candidates to complete. Sometimes the school selects the pupils and just sends them to the college, but I think more and more that is not as common because you really want to see the calibre of the candidate that you're getting in. You will provide induction to the course and the college. You will probably provide attendance reports on pupils to the school to agreed timelines. And you'll provide progress reports on pupils to the school to agreed timelines for, say, for example, parents' evenings. And also, you will submit the entries to SQA. The reason you will do all of that, particularly if you're the presenting centre, is because these functions are often linked to quality criteria as part of the quality assurance framework that you can be audited against. College will also sometimes accommodate pupils sitting at external assessments, and that was one of the key dates I highlighted to you. You will also carry out internal assessments, i.e. the units. Remember in Webinar 1 we talked about accessing the most up-to-date unit specification and the unit assessment support packs and tapping into whatever support's available to help you, in particular next steps guidance for unit assessment. And also you will undertake any coursework with them. And again, remember in Webinar 1 we talked about accessing the course specification, the marking instructions, the course reports and accessing exemplification. And also preparing your candidate with a question paper by, for example, using a specimen question paper from SQA. You also will have to determine the assessment arrangement that's required, both for the subject they're delivering and also for whatever components that are involved in that subject. And we'll chat more about assessment arrangements just shortly. But it's really important if you have, at the moment, candidates from a school coming to your college, that the school has informed you about any assessment arrangements that individual pupil may have already in place. And more importantly, the school must obtain consent from the pupil to share their personal data with the college. So again, that's why it's so important that any partnership model or any partnership working, the detail of that arrangement is written down. Obviously, as a college, internal verification is something close to your hearts, and I'm sure you'll be carrying that out in accordance with your own internal verification policy and process for national qualifications. And again, as the presenting centre, you would receive notification of external verification selections, and also you would arrange for a submission of evidence to SQA or for the visit. You would host the verification visit and supply the required sample of candidate evidence, judgments and internal verification records. The college would receive the external verification report and address any required actions. You as a college may also deal with any internal assessment appeals against internal assessment judgments under its own assessment appeals procedure. You're also making sure, if the candidate's doing the course, that any externally assessed coursework is carried out under the required conditions of assessment, and the candidate's work is submitted to SQA for marking. And again, we'll look at conditions of assessment in the context to avoid malpractice in Webinar 3. You'll also receive notification of visiting assessor examining visits for external assessment, where practical skills are being assessed. You may host those visits, and you may also accommodate pupils sitting external assessments, either question papers as part of Diet 2019, along with providing agreed assessment arrangements that might be required. And as I also mentioned, you might have to also submit an exceptional circumstance request. So again, it was really important that you have submitted all of those, and that was why I highlighted some of the key dates for you. In terms of resulting, you will submit unit results to SQA and any marks for coursework. And obviously too, on results day, you will determine if any requests are required for a post-results service. And finally, as a college, you would be credited with pupils' attainment of qualifications undertaken at the college. You would also inform the school of pupil attainment of their qualifications. And again, that would be reported for you as part of the Scottish Funding Council in terms of your performance indicators. And for schools, their Insight tool captures activity of school pupils undertaking college qualifications. So a lot to consider there, and really any good partnership model will ensure that it has all of those aspects covered. If you have any questions, having listened to this part of the webinar and you're just not sure, speak to your college coordinator again, who should know what the partnership working agreement is. And if you're still not sure, speak to your liaison manager or your regional manager, and we'll be very happy to help in any way that we can. What I'd like to do now is move on to the last part of the webinar for today, and that's looking at assessment arrangements. Now, this is very much a high-level overview, folks, but I think it's important if you're involved with national qualifications that you are aware of the options that might be available to your candidates. The reason SQA allow assessment arrangements is about ensuring access to assessment. It's about equal opportunity. Just because you have a disability or a particular assessment need, you should not be barred from undertaking assessment. SQA have principles that they apply to assessment arrangements, and we'll explore these shortly because they tie to the SQA audits. Often each year SQA will undertake an assessment arrangement across, with a sample of centres across Scotland. So it's important that you, when you are identifying assessment arrangements and making that request, you have the right evidence, because you could be audited for that. I think it's really important to emphasise this point too, that assessment arrangements are not just about the external assessments, they're also about the internal assessments. So the assessment arrangements principle apply to both internal assessment. So think of what your candidate might need for the freestanding SEQF level 5 or higher units, and also possibly the advanced higher units that are still mandatory content in the advanced higher course, and also external assessments, i.e. examinations, for example question papers and the coursework. Make sure you think about all components that make up the external assessment within a national course. So it's about external exams and internal assessment, and it's about being clear about what are the principles we would want you to adhere to ensure you're making good sound judgments about what a candidate needs. So what I've done up now is I've put up some examples that I just want to quickly run through with you, because I don't know about you, but I wasn't that up to date with these. I wasn't aware of how many there was, and actually you can really have as many as you want depending on what needs your candidate has. So there's lots of different types of adapted question papers you can request using SQA's assessment arrangements request system. And that can range from a digital question paper to a question paper printed on a specified colour, to a standard larger print, to a modified large print, up to maybe 48 points or 36 points, and in a different font style. You can also request brailled question papers. You can ask for raised diagrams, and you can ask for question papers with double line spacing. What's important though is if you are requesting adapted question papers, and remember the closing date for those folks was the 31st of January, is that whatever you're requesting, your candidate should be familiar with the format of the adopted original question paper being requested. In other words, you want them to have equal opportunity when they tap into using that adapted question paper as they would if they were using it in the classroom. SQA can also provide adapted versions of coursework assessment tasks for admin and IT and accounting on request. In terms of assistance and oral assessments, this has 3 formats, so we can give you technological aids, which provides better access to sound. We can give you extra time in the listening assessments in the external examination. And if required, we can provide or allow for live presentation of the listening assessment in the external exam. So again, bear that in mind if you have a candidate who maybe has a hearing difficulty. In terms of extra time, what's important about extra time is it can be permitted in any timed assessment. What you have to ensure that the extra time is only provided to candidates to address an identified disadvantage. Only those candidates who have been identified as having a particular disability or difficulty, you must make sure you've got the appropriate evidence of their need to make sure that they're eligible for extra time, and we can allow that to go through. What's important too about extra time is the amount of extra time required may vary according to the candidate's individual needs. So gone are the days, folks, where you maybe have a whole class and you think, right, I'm going to give them all 25% extra time. You need to make sure you're considering the individual candidate's needs. In terms of ICT or digital question papers, the use of ICT is where you would prefer the candidate to type or speak the responses, or to read the response while using the conventional question paper. For many disabled candidates and those with other additional support needs, using ICT to type or dictate with speech recognition software is much better for them. If you have a candidate who wants to use the conventional question paper but requires the use of ICT, you can request this using the Assessment Arrangements Request system. And again, there's further guidance on that within the guidance document I'll mention to you just shortly. Again, we can also provide digital answer booklets as well, so that if it's easier for your candidate to type in the response rather than writing it, we can do that too for them. And again, we can provide the digital question papers or the digital booklet in a PDF format. So again, it's about understanding what's available to your candidate to give them the best possible experience of assessment. And finally, for numerical support, candidates who are appropriately identified as having a specific disability in number manipulation, calculation or retention can be eligible for an assessment arrangement. So it's worth bearing that in mind so that if there's a disadvantage there, they can still access the assessment that's available to them. Some other examples here. Practical assistant. Well, a practical assistant is exactly as it's described on the tin. It is someone who carries out some tasks either in a practical assessment under the explicit instruction of the candidate. So that could be a lot of your skill-based courses, the likes of hospitality, maybe photography, etc. And it's permitted for candidates who have difficulties that prevent them from carrying out practical assessments safely and independently. So again, that is an option that might suit your candidates too. Another one, and my son had this for his national qualifications, he had what we call a prompt. And a prompter is someone who can be present during an assessment to ensure that a candidate stays on task. A prompter may be required where a candidate has little or no sense of time or has significant concentration difficulties. The prompter may sit beside the candidate to keep their attention on the assessment. I don't know about you folks, but sometimes I could do with that at work myself. In terms of a reader or referral to the principal assessor, a reader is exactly that. It's a human reader who can be allowed to meet the needs of the candidate who has substantial difficulties with reading text, and maybe who can't also access assessment material by any other appropriate means. So, for example, if ICT wouldn't work for them, they might want a human reader involved. There's some rules around using a human reader, and again, all of that is available in the guidance document, which I'll tell you about just shortly. In terms of scribe, again, that's really important. That can be used where the candidate may have substantial difficulties, again, with writing, and maybe who couldn't produce their written responses by any other means, for example, using ICT. And again, the rules around that are available in our guidance on our open website. In terms of sign language, with the exception of English, ESOL and Gaelic learners and modern languages, deaf candidates may have the contents of a question paper or an assessment task signed to them by a sign communicator in any external assessment. So, with the exception of English, ESOL, Gaelic learners and modern languages, deaf candidates can access the assessments too. And some final examples. You may have heard about supervised breaks or rest periods. These are permitted during a timed assessment. The time taken for the break does not count towards the time allowed for the assessment concerned. What's important there, though, is if you submit that request, it's your responsibility to supervise the candidate if they're out of the room. It's not the invigilators. So bear that in mind when making that request to make sure your building, your college can cope with that. And the sort of last two ones that I've highlighted there are transcription with correction of spelling and punctuation. And that one is really to remove the illegibility or the unreadability of a candidate's written response. And the one without correction is exactly that, where to meet the needs of those candidates who have illegible handwriting and who are unable to use appropriate ICT. So again, that's very much high-level information, folks. But as I mentioned at the beginning of this section of the webinar, some of these I wasn't aware of. And again, it's just to make sure that you're not maybe applying old methods or assessment arrangements to your candidates' needs. Okay, so moving on very quickly. Oh, sorry, I'm moving on too quickly. We want to give you another wee poll. You've been listening enough to me, so we'll take a break for a minute or two, and we've got another poll for you, folks. You're absolutely right there, folks. It does depend on their need and the subject. However, there is no numerical limit to the number of types of assessment arrangements you request. So actually, really, the answer there is none of the above. But you're right, very important, depends on the need and subject, but do not think you can only have two things attached to that. You can have as many as is required, as long as the rigour and integrity of the assessment is not undermined. Okay, so moving on then to our last section of this webinar, we're going to chat a little bit about evidence for assessment arrangements. What I explained to you there was the types that you can have access to for your candidate. But like anything, if you submit an assessment arrangement request, we as the awarding body have a responsibility to audit that or to quality assure it. So what might happen in any given year is that you might find yourself selected for audit of your assessment arrangements. This is where SQA check the application and compliance with their quality assurance requirements in relation to the provision of assessment arrangements, and again for both internal and external assessments. SQA will expect to see 7 types of documentary evidence that colleges require to have available to demonstrate that they have an effective internal quality assurance system for identifying, matching and verifying their candidates' needs for assessment arrangements. And we affectionately refer to these as the 7 E's. To understand each of these, let's start with number 7, and that might seem strange, but it actually underpins everything. Number 7 will help you as a lecturer in your subject to find a starting point for your own centre's policy and approach to assessment arrangements. And why is that? Because E7 looks for documented evidence that there is a whole college-wide policy in relation to the provision of assessment arrangements and evidence of dissemination of this policy. So take comfort from that, folks. It's not about just what you're doing in your subject in your classroom. There should be a college-wide policy that you should be able to go and get help and support with. E1 relates to that, and E1 is all about what about those verification meetings? And we know colleges have verification meetings. You do that all the time in terms of your internal assessment, but they should be covering assessment arrangements. Is there a formal note about assessment arrangements? Are assessment arrangements undertaken and discussed at the appropriate time of year? Are the appropriate personnel present? So are you, as the lecturer, having to make the judgment about assessment arrangements, or is there specialists within your college who can help you with that? Who authorises any decisions? And also, what are the procedures for late requests? Because we know candidates don't always share with you or are very good at masking what some of their difficulties might be. So the sooner you know about what your college-wide policy is and how you can tap into that help and support, the better. E2 is about, have you got confirmation from the candidate that they have agreed to the assessment arrangement? In other words, have you got their signature? Have you got agreement that they're happy to have that assessment arrangement in place? If they're under 18, if they're under 16, you would need a parent or guardian signature. Is it clear what subjects and level you're talking about and what type of assessment? So again, folks, we're talking there about the subject, the level within that subject, and whether it's internal assessment, and if it's external assessment, are you covering all components within that external assessment? E3 is about documentary evidence of the candidate's disability and additional support needs, and how it affects the learning and teaching and assessment situation. That's really important, because there you have to have evidence that is current and again for each subject. Gone are the days when you can put in blanket requests across all subjects and request all the same type of assessment arrangement. You would discover that if you were going to use the assessment arrangement system, you have to put it in subject by subject. And the last 3 are related, E4, E5 and E6. And that talks about, E4 talks about documentary evidence of need for current support, how is it met, and how it relates to the assessment arrangement requested. Are subject leaders involved in that? How do you know that assessment arrangements are effective and removes the disadvantage? So that's maybe where you're preparing your candidate for using the assessment arrangement that would be in place for the external exam. So you might want to do some testing and checking within the teaching or classroom environment. Because again, it's really important that your evidence is current there. Do you have documentary evidence for each subject? So it's not just the need, but is it there for each subject? And finally, E6, do you have appropriate evidence of how a particular assessment arrangement type has been determined? So all those types that I've just chatted to you about, how did you select that one? Have you got evidence to support it? For example, extra time or a scribe. Obviously, you will have evidence generated by the candidate in the classroom teaching setting that indicates that's the right assessment arrangement for them. So lots to think about there, folks, but I think what's important to highlight there is that your college should have a college-wide system. And if you're in doubt about that, speak to your college coordinator in the first instance. We've got a last few polls for you now before we move on to the question and answer session. Well done, absolutely. It must be current and for each subject component. Yeah, well done, Magnificent Seven, thank you. Well done, folks. Both of the above. It's decisions. So while you don't submit a request for internal assessment, you still need to have evidence of that need. Just to highlight to you where you can access the information I've been sharing with you today, there's sort of 3 key documents there if you are based within a college. Assessment arrangements explained, information's for centres, so that's where it talks you through the different types of assessment arrangements a candidate can get access to. We then look at the quality assurance of assessment arrangements, information for colleges, and that's the audit requirements, so that's your 7Es that are explained in detail in there. And that third document is just additional guidance. So again, they are all available on our open website, www.sqa.org.uk, and when you land on the home page, simply type in assessment arrangements in the search bar and it will take you to that guidance. But again, if you've got a college-wide policy, they will already have that and be making sure that internal verification process picks all of that up. Again, if you're looking for specific help and detail, in terms of our policy, there's 2 lovely ladies, you may already know them or have come across them, Patricia McDonald or Annette Fulker at SQA can help if you're just not sure what particular assessment arrangement type you should maybe be selecting for your candidate. If you have any questions about when you are submitting a request, I don't know whether you'll do that, but probably someone in the college will have responsibility for that. They can go to the assessment arrangements team in terms of using the assessment arrangements request system. You can also speak to your quality enhancement manager who do audits on a regular basis for systems verification, or speak to your liaison manager. We would be happy to come out and give you that sort of high-level overview of assessment arrangements again. So don't be shy in tapping in or asking for support and help if you need it. We would rather you did that and got things right than get yourself into a guddle as time goes on. Also, just to highlight lastly, if anything I've mentioned in Webinar 1 or today in Webinar 2 that you would like more information on, please speak to your local liaison manager. If you're not sure who that is, just ask during the question and answer session and I can let you know that. And again, you can keep up to date with any changes at that link that's given there. What I'd like to do now is hand back over to Sandra Jane, who will tell you what's coming up in Webinar 3.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Wow, what a comprehensive coverage of assessment arrangements. I had no idea there was quite so many. In terms of the 3 documents that Fiona mentioned, folks, what we've done is when we move to the closing slide, we've actually created files of these which you can download to your computer or to a data stick. We appreciate that sometimes it can be quite difficult finding things on the SQA and other websites. So in terms of next steps, in terms of this webinar series, we have Webinar 3 coming up on Monday the 29th of October. And up till now, we've covered a variety of the key dates, but most people who perhaps are finding themselves selected for external verification, you may want to get a little bit more familiar with the SQA's quality assurance model for national qualifications. So this is where Webinar 3 will come in really useful. The other thing that we're going to be discussing in Webinar 3, which we did touch on very, very briefly in the previous webinar, is about how you can ensure you avoid any cases of candidate or centre malpractice in relation to dealing with assessment conditions for these revised national qualifications. So again, something that's useful for practitioners regardless of which subject area that you're doing. And we hope that perhaps we'll see some of you again for Webinar 3. And please spread the word. We will have the webinar recording up shortly, available for any colleagues who perhaps missed this content today. Okay, I'm going to hand back across to Susan now, who is stepping in for Kat, and Susan's going to close the webinar and then kickstart the official question and answer session for us. Okay, thanks again, Fiona.
Thank you, SG. We will now stop the recording and carry on with the question and answer session. If you just bear with me a moment,